Good morning and welcome back to my channel and to Cursed Keepsakes. This is chapter 5. If you if you haven't caught any of the previous chapters, I do recommend you start from chapter 1. It makes a lot more sense. I'll put a link down on the bottom in case you need it. It is a beautiful spring day here in Tokyo. The the sakura are getting ready to go, and the days are warming up, and everyone's getting ready for the end of the school year. It is just like you may have seen in the anime. Kids getting out under the sakura blossoms and graduating, and all of the high school kids are out looking for suits, and all the college graduates are out looking for suits for their or for their new jobs. It's very funny. It's a very exciting time in the city. Without further ado, here it is. Cursed Keepsakes, Chapter 5. Niko sat in his car, staring at the truck across the street for a long time before shaking his weariness away and opening the car door. He hadn't slept well at all the previous night. His mind kept returning to the mesmerization issue. He relived the revelation of his brother's depravity and misuse of power, and felt once again the shame at not noticing that his own brother was so evil. He heard Callum's suggestion again, that he use his power to get the information that would help them, and his stomach twisted. He thought of the absolutely slimy feeling he had gotten from the desk set, and the painting that now sat locked in his back room at the shop, and imagined some innocent human getting that feeling and ignoring it as he had, but being affected much more deeply and for longer. The whole mess was making him sick. He turned to get out of his car and grimaced. More than just his internal struggle was against going out there. It was a cold, gray morning, the sort that made him long for a hot cup of coffee and a good book. Instead, he was here again, around other people, doing his duty to the Chicago non-human community. It was one specific other person in question that caused an extra layer of reluctance to people. As if summoned by his thoughts, Callum came around the back of the truck to scowl at him. At least the boy was wearing a scarf this morning. It was a lumpy, knitted thing that looked like it had lost a fight with a dog at some point, but it was a scarf nonetheless. That poor excuse for a coat was still making Niko cold just to look at it, though. "Are we doing this, or what?" Callum asked. Niko sighed. "Is Miss Cartland here?" "Inside." Callum seemed to soften slightly. "She brought coffee and donuts." "Oh, that was very kind of her." Niko shook his weariness off and nodded at Callum. "Well, let's get on with it then." "You ready to use your vamp power to get the credit card info?" Callum asked. Niko held back a growl. "I object to the thought that the only way to gather the information is to violate someone's mind." Callum scoffed. "Whatever, dude. Sorry that the best way to save the community offends your delicate leech sensibilities." An unfamiliar desire to punch the elf swept over Niko as he reminded himself that violence was never a good choice. Instead, he took a deep breath and followed the boy around the truck toward the house. As he passed the open back of the truck, he noticed that there were already several boxes inside. "We got started as soon as she opened the door. No reason to drag it out." Niko nodded. "Agreed. The sooner started, the sooner finished, and we can sort out the dangerous from the perfectly fine." Callum shrugged and followed him inside, though somewhat slower. It seemed Niko wasn't the only one feeling the previous day's exertions. Granted, he doubted that the boy had been kept awake by personal ethical dilemmas. "Oh, good morning, Mr. Cooper." Nancy Cartland's voice rang out cheerfully when he opened the door. "I have coffee. I know I'm a bit of a lark, but you two worked so hard yesterday that I felt you deserved to start today off right." "Thank you." Niko accepted a mug and reached for the sugar packet sitting beside the box of coffee. To-go coffee in cardboard boxes. The modern world never ceases to amaze him. "I do hope your friend is okay," Ms. Cartland continued chattering as she reached for her clipboard. "I turned my ankle once while carrying a small box of books, nothing like the ones you're handling, and that was bad enough. Granted, I was wearing heels at the time, and young Callum has the good sense to wear sneakers at least." Niko blinked at her. "I'm sure that if he wasn't well enough, he would say something." She smiled. "I hope so. Such a nice young man. His friend is a bit rough around the edges, but I'm sure that's at least in part due to the early morning. It's never much fun to wake up early on a cold weekend morning. Now then." His brain snagged on one word. Friend? Oh! She looked up at him in surprise. He brought another young man to help him load the truck. I thought you knew. I did not, but I'm sure it's fine. I am borrowing the truck, and, indeed, Callum, from a friend of mine. I'm sure she just sent another of her assistants to help. Oh, that's so kind. It's lovely to have friends willing to help when you're in a pinch. Does she run a business like yours? Sort of. She runs a small private museum. Niko sipped at his coffee. There was a clatter on the stairs before they could continue, and Callum appeared with the box. Only about 6 more of these. We'll bring the chair and stuff up after that, he said without looking at either of them. Niko watched him, and Ms. Cartland was right. Callum appeared to be limping slightly, but it was only slowing him a bit. He also still wore the ratty scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. Niko was distracted from the hideous thing by the clomping of another pair of feet on the stairs. Behind Callum came one of the other would-be hunters from earlier that year. The other boy glanced at Niko and gave him a sharp nod of acknowledgement before hustling outside with his box. At least he was wearing a warm-looking coat. Niko sighed and turned back to Ms. Cartland. At any rate, I hope we can get most of this finished today and we'll be out of your hair. If you don't finish today, don't worry. I have an intern coming in tomorrow that I can send over for the morning, she answered. However, did you have a chance to go over the inventory yesterday? There are 1 or 2 things that I have some paperwork for. A few antiques and such that you'll want the history of. Niko spent the next hour discussing provenance and history and trying not to notice Callum's limp or the way the other elf, whose name Niko definitely hadn't heard, tried to avoid him, even though he heard both elves laughing and teasing once they were out of the room. I think that's everything I have notes for. I had expected to be giving out the information one thing at a time, but I do have this file for you, in case I had to turn it all over to an auction house or something. We have a few places we use for larger items and a list of charities and such. If I may add you to the list, that would be lovely. I do like to support local businesses when I can. Niko smiled. That would be fine. Thank you. I'm always looking out for new stock, although after today it might be January before I need to fill a space in my shop. Callum came in, hovered by Niko's elbow for a moment. Hey, Jake took the truck over to Wendy's to unload over there. I'm going to pack up the books in the office and any small stuff I find around while we're waiting for him to get back. That sounds good. Thank you, Callum, Niko said. If you need a break, go ahead and take one. And don't forget to drink some water. It's cold today, but you're working hard. Callum sent him a confused look, but simply nodded before turning to head out of the kitchen. At the bottom of the stairs, he stopped and turned. Oh, did you ask about that desk set? I know you were bummed that you missed it yesterday. Niko glared at him. I had not yet. You should. Callum smirked back over his shoulder. I know you really wanted to track it down. Niko wondered if he would finally resort to the sort of stereotype he hated and attack the smug child. Oh, did someone snatch something out from under you yesterday? Miss Cartland asked, her voice full of amusement and her eyes twinkling. That's the danger of these things, I'm afraid. Niko took a deep breath to steady his nerves. Yes, well, I was wondering if you had some records or something. I would be happy to buy it from whoever purchased it. Ms. Cartland laughed. Oh dear, I didn't keep records of every sale, I'm afraid. Wouldn't make sense, really. If there was an item that had paperwork to go with it, I made sure to hand the appropriate file over. Otherwise, I didn't have much to do other than collect the payment. Niko smiled. Indeed. I thought it would be a long shot, but worth asking. I had hoped that something like the desk set would be priced high enough to require a check or a credit card payment, but this is the risk of estate sales, as you said. Miss Cartland smiled sympathetically. Only too true. I did take a few credit card payments yesterday. I have to say this whole pay-through-your-phone technology is so incredibly convenient. My office manager had to talk me into it, but I am so glad he did. So few people carry cash anymore, and a surprising amount of traffic through these estate sales are people who just wander in. Niko ground his teeth, but tried to keep a pleasant expression. So there's no chance you could point me in the right direction? I'm afraid not. Even if they did pay with a credit card, I can't give away that information. It simply wouldn't be ethical. Niko swore that if Callum even so much as smirked at him, he would break his own rules against violence and smack the smug expression right off his face. With a deep breath, he reached for that inner well of magic that helped sustain his life. He had fed that morning, expecting to need extra energy to keep his patience as well as work hard moving everything, so the magic felt fresh and full of potential, just waiting to be directed. With extreme care, he focused his will on Ms. Cartland. Her smile flickered, and her eyes drooped slightly, and he knew that he had reached her mind. Now for the delicate part. He didn't want to push too deeply or force her to do anything that she would be horrified by later, should she remember. Fortunately, it seemed that she was inclined to view making a profit as more appealing than keeping her name and contact information secret, so it would be easy enough for her to justify giving out others' contact information in the name of them theoretically making a profit. Are you quite sure you can't give me a list of names from your records? I'd be happy to pay them well for what they purchased, he said, his voice flowing out like silk, and her eyelids drooped further. Yes, well, Her voice came out slowly, but clearly. I swear to you, I would only use the information to find the things they bought from this house. A little reassurance never hurt in this. Well, if you're sure, she said. I am. Can I get that list? I can email it to you from my phone. Do that. Ms. Cartland pulled her phone out and started tapping buttons. Wow, you really did it. Callum's voice came from right behind him and almost caused him to jump. Another slow, deep breath, and he backed gently away from the magic. I am breaking all of my rules of conduct right now, and I need to concentrate to make sure nobody is hurt by this. Do you mind very much not distracting me? Callum's eyes grew wide as dinner plates. Holy fuck! He gasped, stumbling back. Niko closed his eyes. He knew what Callum was reacting to. In order to fully assert his control, Niko had to reveal everything. Callum was getting his first look at Niko's vampire. Fangs like needles protruded from his gums, replacing the more human teeth he preferred to show. Blood red filled in what had been the whites of his eyes in his human form, and endless black filled the rest, and stared out from an inhumanly angular face. Claws extended from his fingertips, and his skin was chalk white. Sorry. Callum stumbled away, visibly favoring his left leg. As he went, Niko's sharper vampire vision caught the edge of a dark bruise under the scarf, and another on his wrist as he fled up the stairs. Here. Ms. Cartland's voice snapped his attention back to her. Hell's bells, he needed to focus on one task at a time. The elf boy would have to wait a bit longer. Thank you, Niko said, his voice back to the smooth, comforting tone. You will feel comfortable with this, I know. Everyone stands to profit from this. I am just a harmless shopkeeper, after all. Yes, she said softly, it's fine. Perhaps you should erase the record of this email anyway, he said, and let this conversation fade from your memory, like a dream. A dream, she said, nodding slowly. She tapped her phone's screen again. A good dream. Niko carefully let his magic fade back to where it usually sat, and Ms. Cartland blinked slowly a few times. I'm going to take these files out to my car, then I suppose I should go help Callum pack more things. I hope we can finish this up today, he said in a more normal tone. It was hard to achieve that, feeling as guilty as he did. Taking someone's will away from them was an awful thing to do. Ms. Cartland shook her head as if clearing it. Oh, yes, that would be great. But as I said, if there's some left in the morning, I can send my intern over to open up for you. Just let me know. I'll be in here doing some work on my laptop should you need anything. Niko smiled at her and nodded and headed for the front door, Providence paperwork in hand. Now he wondered, what do I do about Callum? And why is he injured? And what the hell is he up to? Excellent questions, all of them. And there may be some answers in the next chapter. No promises, though. I'll see you next week.